I started volunteering at the city library a few weeks ago. I'd been there many times before during regular hours, but this was my first chance to see what it was like after closing time. There is something peaceful about large, quiet rooms filled with shelves of books. At least, that's what I believed until I volunteered for the night shift. The head librarian, Mrs. Cunningham, needed help organizing some of the older collections. She told me somewhat casually that certain books were rarely touched. She mostly meant old reference volumes and worn encyclopedias tucked away in a side area. I agreed to do the job without much thought. I've always loved the smell of old paper and the feel of wooden shelves under my fingertips. But as soon as the security guard locked the library doors at 8 o'clock, I felt the air change like a whisper moved through the halls, telling me I was now alone among rows and rows of silent stories. I flipped on a few overhead lights which glowed faintly, leaving most corners in shadow. The library had tall ceilings and a second-floor balcony that overlooked the main reading room. The older shelves were on the ground floor, far in the back where I rarely saw visitors go. Some overhead lamps flickered, as if the wiring was old. My footsteps echoed on the polished floor, making the place feel emptier than it was. I found the cart of books Mrs. Cunningham left for me. The plan was simple. Reshelve these odds and ends that had been returned or rediscovered from storage. I started scanning the spines for call numbers, sliding them into the correct spots. Nothing too difficult. But the flickering lights made me uneasy, especially when they caused shadows to jump around me. Maybe an hour passed. My mind wandered, and I nearly forgot I was alone there. Then I caught motion from the corner of my eye. A shape small, hunched, and human-sized crossed the end of the aisle. My heart skipped. I jerked my head up, but the shape was gone. All I saw were more shelves and the faint glow from the reading lamps. At first, I assumed it was the security guard making his rounds. It would be normal for him to walk through, right? "Hello?" I said softly. No reply. I felt a nervous flutter in my stomach, but forced myself to keep working. If the guard was around, he might be checking the building's exits, or he might have gone to the staff room for coffee. But that shape I saw didn't move like a tall, uniformed person with a flashlight. It shuffled lower to the ground, almost like an elderly person with thick layers of clothing. Still, I tried to brush off the thought. I continued shelving dusty volumes. Most had dull covers, titles about ancient history, local archives, or dictionary sets. This part of the library felt different from the bright children's section or the main hall with new releases. It had a stale smell, like old, forgotten paper. Some volumes looked like they hadn't been opened in years. As I finished placing a particularly heavy atlas, a soft sound reached my ears. It was like cloth brushing against cloth, accompanied by a faint shuffle. I rested my hand on the shelf, holding my breath. The noise came from behind one of the tall shelves to my right. Slowly, I stepped away from the cart, swallowing a knot of fear. "Maybe it's just the guard," I whispered to reassure myself. But the hair on the back of my neck stood up, convinced otherwise. I followed the noise, peering around the corner. Dim overhead lights left the back rows in gloom. My heart pounded. I saw something move again, a hunched figure turning the corner quietly. I only caught a glimpse of a shoulder, maybe a gray coat. My mouth went dry. "Hello?" I tried again, this time a little louder. It felt wrong to raise my voice in a library, even if it was empty. Nervousness built in my chest. Why would the guard or any staff member hide from me? Feeling compelled to figure it out, I followed. Each row of shelves had neat labels, but the arrangement was a maze. I turned one corner, then another, running my fingertips along the spines of ancient tomes just to keep my path. Finally, I emerged into a circular reading space at the back, which most visitors never notice. It's where older manuscripts are sometimes displayed behind glass. A single overhead bulb shone in that reading area. In the far corner stood a locked section. I'd seen it before. Old iron gates closed over a section of shelves that contained rare or fragile books. Usually, no one entered that section without special permission. When I was hired to volunteer, I was told the gates remained locked at all times. Tonight, they were definitely locked. My steps echoed on the marble floor, and I realized that if the figure had come this way, it had nowhere else to go. There were no other exits from this corner of the library, yet I saw no one. Puzzled and alarmed, I scanned the area. The gates to the locked section were dusty, showing no sign of recent disturbance. The overhead bulb flickered, throwing dancing shadows across the metal bars. Suddenly, I spotted a movement behind them, a flicker of motion in the dark. It was the outline of that same hunched figure, half hidden in shadows. My heart lurched. How did it get behind a locked gate? It was barely lit, just a silhouette like someone leaning forward. I couldn't make out a face, only the shape of shoulders and a head, bent to the side as if it was looking directly at me. I froze. My body wanted to run, but my mind insisted that this must be the security guard or some staff member playing a trick. Then the figure moved deeper into darkness, vanishing from view. Confusion rattled me. There was no door in that locked section except a heavy chain and padlock. How could anyone slip inside without keys? My hands trembled. I stepped closer, shining my phone's flashlight through the bars. Rows of old tomes lined the shelves, many roped off or sealed behind glass. Dust motes danced in the narrow beam of light. I saw no footprints, no sign of movement. The place looked untouched, but my pulse refused to calm. I knew what I saw, or at least I thought so. The smell that drifted out was musty, old, almost sour. Something about it made me think of damp cellars. Determined for answers, I called out again, "Hello? Are you locked in there? Do you need help?" My voice sounded too loud, echoing among the shelves. No one replied. The overhead bulb flickered once more, then steadied. In that tense stillness, I found myself stepping back. A wave of dread settled in my stomach like a warning. Maybe I needed the security guard after all. So I headed toward the main hall. My shoes squeaked on the floor, every tiny sound amplified by the library's hush. The corridor leading back had fewer lights on, so the corners lay in deep shadow. I thought about the shape I'd seen, the hunched posture, the way it flickered out of sight. Was it impossible that it was just a trick of my eyes? I reached the information desk near the front, hoping to find the guard. The desk lamp was turned off and no one stood around. The entrance doors were locked from the inside. A small sign read, "After Hours Personnel, Use Side Door." Perhaps he was making rounds on that side. Using the phone on the desk, I tried calling the security office number posted. No answer, only a hollow ring. My heart sank. If I was going to finish my shift, I would need to handle this on my own, unless I wanted to leave early. A swirl of worry and adrenaline told me to keep going and prove I wasn't spooked that easily. I grabbed my cart, deciding to focus on work. The library is huge. If I kept myself busy, maybe the night would end without more incident. So I pushed the cart to a different section, near the older newspapers archived in thick binders. The overhead light here was steadier, which helped calm my nerves a bit. I started shelving newspapers by date, occasionally glancing at the big windows that faced the street. They showed only the dark city outside, street lamps shining in the distance. No cars drove by at this late hour. A scraping sound behind me nearly made me drop a binder. I spun around, heart pounding. At the end of the aisle, I again saw that same hunched shape. This time, it was no more than 2 shelves away. My entire body tensed. The figure appeared to be wearing old-fashioned clothes, maybe a heavy coat. I couldn't see a face, only the suggestion of it in the dark, as if hidden by a hood or a wide collar. One bony hand slid along a shelf, like it was feeling its way forward. Its fingers looked oddly long in the half-light. Fear locked my throat. I managed a single step backward. The binder in my arms felt heavy, but I kept holding it, unsure what else to do. The figure paused, almost as if sensing my presence. Then, in a single fluid movement, it turned and darted away behind the next row. I say darted, but it didn't have a normal speed, more like a sudden blur, whispering along the shelves. My instinct screamed at me to follow or to run. In the end, I found myself chasing it, ignoring the frantic beat of my heart. I dashed after the shape, my footsteps echoing in the high-ceilinged hall. Rounding the corner, I found nothing, just a silent corridor leading to the restricted area again. I stood there, breath ragged, scanning every possible hiding spot. Behind the study carrels, beneath a reading table, or in one of those small nooks used for research. But the figure had disappeared as though swallowed by the shadows. My mind raced, thinking perhaps the figure was some kind of apparition. The idea made me break into a cold sweat. Ghost stories in libraries aren't exactly rare. People always speak of old buildings holding leftover energies from the past. But to see it myself, fighting panic, I decided I should at least check the door to the restricted area. The old gates were locked. Maybe someone had found another entrance. Gathering my courage, I made my way back to that locked section. My footsteps echoed, and somehow the library's hush felt heavier than before. The chain and padlock on the gate remained in place, crusted with rust. I pulled on the metal bar gently, hoping to confirm it was secure. It didn't budge. The overhead lamp flickered as I tested it. Then, from within the restricted section, I heard a quiet rustle. It was so soft it could have been the pages of a book turning, or cloth brushing against the floor. A deep chill settled in my bones. I brought my phone's flashlight up to the gate, casting a beam into the dusty gloom. Shelves greeted me, shelves of old books stacked high. Nothing moved, yet my pulse hammered. I smelled that musty odor again. Then, in the darkness, I noticed a single open gap in a middle shelf, like a book had been removed just seconds ago. Or possibly placed there? I swallowed, calling out, "Who's in there?" No answer, only silence. A wave of panic overcame me. This was no place to stay alone, not with some unknown figure creeping among the aisles. I ran back toward the main entrance, thinking of the security guard station or even the side exit. When I reached the side door, I found it locked from the outside. My phone showed no missed calls, and there was still no reply from the security office. I felt trapped. The library's age and the glow of half-dead bulbs made it all feel unreal, like part of a nightmare. At last I decided I'd had enough. Volunteering or not, I wasn't going to spend another minute in that building by myself. I left the cart behind, picked up my bag from under the information desk, and hurried to the main doors. I had the volunteer key that unlocked them from the inside if needed. My hands trembled as I turned the key. It clicked, and I opened the glass door. A rush of cool night air hit me, a welcome relief from the stale tension inside. Just before stepping out, I glanced over my shoulder. In the dim glow of the overhead lights, the library's interior stretched out in silent rows of shelves. For a moment, I thought I saw that hunched figure again at the far end, near the restricted section. Now, I could see a hint of a face, pale and withdrawn, peering from behind a shelf. Then the overhead lamps flickered, and it vanished once more. I slammed the door shut behind me, heart racing. Outside, the city lights looked comforting. I breathed deeply, feeling my pulse slowly settle. When I turned around, the large glass windows offered a glimpse of the library's main floor. Everything looked still, nothing out of place. Yet I couldn't shake the memory of that shape, those strange movements in the aisles, and the locked gate that apparently held no barrier for it. The next morning I told Mrs. Cunningham that I couldn't volunteer nights anymore, giving a vague excuse about personal reasons. She didn't press me, just gave a sympathetic nod. Once or twice I considered telling her or others what I saw, but I decided they would either laugh or worse, believe me. Part of me sensed there's a history in that building, something older than its books and older than any locked gate can hide. On the rare occasions I walk past the library now, I pause to look at those front doors just before closing time. Through the windows, the shadows seem to move in small flickers, like silhouettes that retreat whenever you try to focus on them. Sometimes I spot the locked section in the back, still chained shut, but the uneasy feeling remains. I wonder if that shape I saw comes out whenever the last staff member leaves, roaming the aisles, searching for a book or a memory lost to the years. If so, it can keep searching without me. I have no desire to go back, no matter how many dusty books remain unshelved.